Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the money monsters for Enneagram Type 3, which are the Burier and the Blinger. But before we get into it, if you need help determining your Enneagram type, as always, you can follow this link to the IEQ9 Integrative Enneagram Test, and I'll put the link in the show notes below. If you follow my link, I get a little kickback, so that's a great way to support this channel. And of course, my new book, Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery, with the Enneagram just came out this week, or last week, last Tuesday, and you can get copies from booksellers everywhere. And if you want to support me even further, please pick up the book, and it'd be a really huge help if you would post a review on Amazon or Goodreads. That would I'd be tremendously grateful for anybody who wants to do that for me. Okay, so let's talk about the Type 3. They're often called the achiever, or I call them humorously the race car of egos, because they're always gunning for the finish line to win that next achievement, but often leaving their authentic selves in the dust. So Type 3s, what happens for us is we have what I call your sacred wound of internalized and externalized sadness. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, to repeat some of my other videos just very quickly, at birth, you had a physical umbilical cord that was cut, but you have immediately developed a psychological umbilical cord that connected you to your caregivers, and that allowed them to do most of the driving for you of your ego in the early years of your life. But that psychological umbilical cord also had to be cut by negative emotions in order for you to individuate and differentiate from your parents and the rest of reality and form a unique ego structure. Okay, so for threes, what happened for us is we got that psychological umbilical cord cut by internalized sadness, or sadness in this context is often referred to as shame. It's really a grief around your identity. And so we have this internalized sadness making us feel ashamed about how we perceive ourselves, and an externalized sadness, which makes us feel ashamed or sad about how we think other people perceive us. And this sort of stereophonic sadness creates our greatest fear, which is that we're fundamentally worthless, that we have no value or place in the world. And for me, when I tap into it, it feels like this almost black hole that's just sitting in the middle of my solar plexus. It's just this sinking void that never seems to be ever able to be filled. And so what we're trying to do is, as threes, we're the achievers or the race cars, because we're always trying to win validation and approval to assuage this unrelenting fear that we're fundamentally worthless. So, for example, if I run a marathon and I come in first place, that forces you to applaud me. I've won that validation and approval. Or if I start a company and make a lot of money, or I get the corner office, or I get the A+ on the test, or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, it's you're looking for external validation to assuage this internal sense of worthlessness. And so we become hyper competitive. And so the fear of failure, any kind of failure for a Type 3, is extremely painful. So we tend to be very competitive, and we tend to also wear a lot of masks. So we're expert mask changers in order to shape shift to fit whatever the ethos of the group that we're in, whatever the ideal of that group is. In order to impress people, we'll just morph ourselves into whatever that needs to be. But in the process, we lose touch with our authentic selves and with our emotions. So threes are in what we call the heart triad of the Enneagram. But what that means for us is we have a very hard time feeling our emotions sometimes, because we're so busy suppressing them in order to get to the next goal or whatever the next achievement is that we're trying to win. And now, when we have money monsters, there's two different money monsters for the Type 3, which is going to be the Burier and the Blinger. And so the Burier is the money-avoidant Type 3, and the Blinger is the money-anxious Type 3. And let me explain that a little bit very quickly. So this goes back to what I call the attachment theory of money, meaning that when we have an unhealthy relationship to money, if we're money avoidant, we tend to push money away because of the shame or the anxiety that it produces for us. If we're financially illiterate. Well, put it this way, threes often equate their self-worth with their net worth. And for a three who doesn't have a lot of money, they look at their paltry portfolio, it brings up all their shame and all their sadness and sense of worthlessness. So they'd rather not look at that. So they tend to bury their head in the sand like an ostrich rather than face the problems in front of them because of all the shame or sadness that it produces. Or they become the blinger, which is mean they become very anxious about money. They want all the money they can get, but they tend to fling it at status symbols because if you want to get social approval, unfortunately, one of the unhealthy ways of doing that is to get social approvals to have lots of status symbols. So the three blinger tends to throw their money at shiny objects, the fancy car, the nice house, whatever, the fancy clothes, in order to win validation and approval from the people around them. But most of us aren't typically all one type of anxious or avoidant. We tend to mix and match, but we tend to fall into one camp or the other. But as always, there's what I call the 4 pillars of finance. And the 4 pillars of finance are going to be earning, saving, investing, and giving. So earning, saving, investing, giving. Those are the 3 pillars of finance that you need to really master in order to have a robust financial life. And so for 3s, for example, you might be an anxious earner, but then an avoidant saver. So if you spend everything you make on stuff because you're flinging it out on status symbols, you're actually an avoidant saver in that respect. Or you might be an anxious investor. You might have a lot of money in the bank, a great portfolio, but then you're so tied to the status that gives you, you avoid giving back to your community, become a bit more narcissistic, and you never, you aren't really using your wealth as a tool for love and service, which is really what a money master is designed to do at their highest level. So let's talk about these 2 types. I'm going to go into the barrier here for a moment, the money avoidant 3. And then, so you sort of picture this. You can sort of, a type 3 sitting on a beach, taking Instagram photos with #blessed while they're, sipping pina coladas. But meanwhile, their credit card company is calling on the phone and, waving more red flags at them than a communist parade. So they're so busy keeping up appearances. They want to keep up the image, but they're avoiding, the real financial situation in front of them. They have this whole stick your head in the sand and just hope the money problems magically disappeared. Right? They've got that down to a science. But real financial responsibility tends to elude them. So here are some of the traits of the barrier. And again, as always, I'm stretching these to somewhat cartoonish proportions just to make a point and partly for laughs. But and you may not have all these traits, but just 1 or 2 if you're a barrier. And the first, I call it the workaholic wonderkin. You're so busy trying to achieve success in your professional life in the external world that then when you come home you sort of ignore the bills, you ignore the budgeting. You're so busy on winning approval from the world around you that you just sort of neglect your financial life at home because you're so busy externalizing, looking for the external validation. And then, of course, you don't want to face the shame that your financial illiteracy or your financial problems are causing you. So then we've got what I call the ostrich impersonation, which is the classic barrier symptom. Just the ostrich sticking their head in the sand and admitting that you're struggling financially is probably about as appealing as running through a mall food court completely naked. And so you just stick your hand in the sand and just hope these things go away. So what you really need to do is then have a little reality check with yourself every day about maybe sit down and have some real hard self-talk about, taking at least some small baby step every day, whether it's just opening up your budgeting app and doing a couple budgeting the expenses for that day, or trying to just tackle this in some meaningful way to get some traction on your financial life. And then we've also got status symbol insanity. It's sort of that, oh boy, new shiny object syndrome. Like, I want the new shiny iPhone. I want the nice clothes. When you don't have the money to actually, buy those, you got to have the vacation because you want to keep up with the Joneses. But maybe try and think about impressing your therapist or your financial advisor more than your neighbor about what you're buying. Now, here's a really fun trait of the money avoidant this is what I call the off-road syndrome. So 3s, we tend to be hyper competitive and we always want to win, which means if we come to a challenge that we don't think we can succeed at, we'll often back away from it because of the fear of failure. So that might mean avoiding entrepreneurial endeavors or merely taking some real risks uh, going off-roading a little bit and seeing what you might accomplish, and realizing that you don't have to be perfect and come in first place. Not everything's a race and not everything's a competition. It's really all in your head. So they sometimes bow out of a race altogether when they don't think they can win it. So, but in finance, there's that saying, no risk, no reward. So maybe time to get off the freeway and stop, running, stop spending your life on a track someone else built and going in circles on that, and maybe see if what you can do to build something for yourself that really is authentic to your true values and your authentic self, that would really feed your soul in terms of your career, or instead of looking outside and saying, what does the world want me to achieve in order to get their validation? What could you achieve for yourself that would really help you live a more authentic life that's true to your values, and so that you can have a really healthier and happier relationship to yourself and to your finances. And then we've got, there's also a comparison concern crisis, that threes, we're always comparing ourselves to the Joneses, to our neighbors, to our coworkers. And again, it's that need to come in first. And so that comparing our financial situation to everyone else puts us on this roller coaster of highs and lows. So we're not content. It's like Theodore Roosevelt said, it's envy is the thief of joy. So it's that I wish I had the words for it. I'll come up with it later. But at any rate, so you basically need to get off of that concern about comparing yourself to everybody else and really find out what's authentic to you and meaningful for you. But the real problem for the Blinger is really just sitting down and facing all that shame and anxiety, shame and sadness and grief you have around your finances. That it's almost like and this is me, so I'm talking about myself here. So I know what this feels like. It's that deep resistance to just sit down at the computer and do your budget, or doing your taxes, or doing your financial planning. It's like, it's so painful sometimes, because money brings up so much complicated emotions, particularly grief and shame around that. And then we've got the money anxious type 3, which is actually a little more common in threes than the Burier. And I call this the Blinger. So the Blinger their life is like a Hollywood set. It's all, beautiful on the outside, but plywood and paint on the inside. And to achieve social status is to have a lot of status symbols. So they're chasing the status symbols in order to, again, assuage that inner sense of worthlessness, which puts them on this treadmill of hyperconsumption, leaving their savings and investment accounts often bereft. So stop worrying about the fancy car, the fancy house, and all the bling that's really going to drive your financial life into a ditch. So here are some traits of the Blinger. I call it the vanity trap. They'll happily sacrifice their financial well-being and their long-term security on the altar of admiration, right? That's looking for the status symbols. And it's like a child grasping for shiny baubles, even though they might be living beyond their means and accumulating a lot of debt in the process. Maybe as a hack, try a stealth wealth challenge for 30 days. Dress down, wear an inexpensive watch, maybe brown bag your lunch, and see who your real friends are. The people who like you then are the people you really want to be hanging out with. Okay, then we've got the monetary milestone mania, and these threes often, again, tie their self-worth to arbitrary financial goals. And they have this mindset of, I'll be happy when I achieve a six-figure income. And then they get to that goalpost and it still doesn't do the job, because it never really assuages that inner sense of worthlessness. So they immediately move the goalpost, and now it's a seven-figure income, or it's a bigger house, or it's a better car. They're never really satisfied with where they're at, because they're not really chasing the right things in some real way. So it's like kind of financial whack-a-mole. It's an endless cycle of never enough, never enough, never enough. So what you really need to do is practice some real self-compassion and I'll get into how to become a money master. That's a whole nother video. And then I've also got the I'll rest when I'm dead delusion. So I'm guilty of this many times. It's sort of like thinking that's stuck on that hamster wheel, always needing to be feeling like you're productive. For a lot of threes, I know this is true for myself. It's like you've got this endless to-do list in your head. And if you aren't constantly doing something, you feel a kind of restlessness inside. And threes with the rest when I'm dead delusions like sleep, vacation, hobbies, that's for the weak. They think that every waking moment not spent earning or scheming is a moment wasted. And so it's that threes often become what we call a human doing rather than a human being. That threes have a really hard time just being in the present moment and not feeling like they've got to be accomplishing something in order to feel good about themselves. And then lastly, I've called the financial facade fixation. These blingers are masters of smoke and mirrors. They'll lease a luxury car they can't afford, throw lavish parties on maxed out credit cards. And what they really need to maybe do is what I call a fake versus real rich journal. So what would a really rich person do in this situation? And it probably involves sensible shoes and an index fund and not trying to impress the Joneses. So anyway, that's a quick summary of the traits of the Burier and the Blinger. And if you want to go into much more depth, of course, check out my book, Taming Your Money Monster, wherever I put that. I just lost my own book. Here it is. Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Master with the Enneagram. And if you're looking for financial coaching, I'm available. You can check out my website, douglynham.com. If you want some individualized help with some of these struggles, I'm available for that. It's always one of my favorite things to do. And thank you again, and please remember to post some reviews and share and like these videos if you enjoy them. That really supports this work and supports this channel. Take care. Talk to you soon.